Now that we have completed the auto retopo stage, we're ready to move on to the next step, and that is texture baking. If we are working on a model for animation or perhaps a game model, we probably would want to spend a bit of time setting up our UVs properly. And the reason for that is we would likely spend quite a bit of time in the texture painting stage, and working with clean and efficient UVs will really help our workflow. If we just try to brush through and have 3D Coat auto map everything, it will just make our job that much harder. So that's the decision you'll have to make. But for a lot of concept artists, you probably just want to plow right through and have 3D Coat auto map the model for you. So to do that, there are two different ways you could approach it. We can go to the UV section here, select one of these options, and our UV tools will be open to us. So instead of us creating seams and clicking unwrap, we can have 3D Coat auto map. Another option is to go through the bake menu, which we will momentarily. In the import dialog, we have an option to select auto map as well, and that might be the fastest way to go about it. But I'll go ahead and show this method here. What I've done is I've actually selected the parts here for the body by going to their individual layer, and I can click on this select all faces on layer icon, and I can continue doing that. I can hold down this shift key and click on that. Another option is to hold the shift key, and you don't even have to select the layer this time. You can just, in the select tool in faces mode, just hold down the shift key and double click, and it should select whatever model you double tap on, regardless of what layer it's on. I created a separate UV map. You can do that here, and it will give you the opportunity to name it as you create it. Once that's done, you can move whatever faces you have selected to that new UV map, and I've already done that. Okay, so I'll hit escape. And now, again, go to the UV section. I'm on torso. I can just click auto map. And it's auto mapped everything that has been assigned to this particular UV set. Everything up here, it's left alone because they are not assigned to the torso UV set. So now let's go to the head, and I can click auto map. Okay, so now I can preview those. That's one method that you can use, and we'll stick with this for now. If you wanted to merge everything onto a single UV map, the quickest way to go about it is clicking Unify UV, and you can click Auto Map again if you need. We're ready to proceed. Before I do, I want to mention anytime you have multiple objects in a scene, like you have here, many parts either touch other objects or intersect with them. And that will always create texture baking issues in any 3D application. To counteract that, you may find add-ons and plugins and other tools that will allow you to explode the bake. That means it's going to take the high poly object and its corresponding low polygon version, and it will move those two parts away in 3D space so they are no longer touching other objects. 3D Coat handles it in a slightly different way. Instead of moving them in 3D space, it's going to look for a named correspondence between your voxel object. For example, here, you can see the shoulder plate. 3D Coat is going to bake these two together during the texture baking process while ignoring everything else. Then, when it's done baking that, it will move on to the other objects as well. All the work that we did in Auto-Retopo automatically named our layers accordingly. So when we auto-retopologized this shoulder plate, it automatically named our retopo mesh with the same name. that already sets us up to use this particular feature right here, name correspondence for baking. Let's go ahead and get started now. We can test and see whether or not all of our layers do have a names correspondence by clicking that, and it does indicate that everything is copacetic. Okay, so let's go back to the bake menu, and we want to make sure that's checked. Next, we'll choose the baking method. Bake with normal map per pixel painting. You can choose bake with per pixel painting with displacement, but in this case, with normal maps is fine. The first dialog will allow us to adjust the inner and outer baking cages globally and locally. I can toggle ghosting. As I zoom in, you can see how far it's extruded. This is one reason why I would typically choose to auto map during this texture baking stage instead of doing it ahead of time, because all these seams can be visually distracting. But for our purposes, I'm just going to plow right on through. I want to explain, though, that when you're working on the inner cage, you do not want to see any of that cage poking through your voxel object. That is why you would want to adjust the level here until you see no more poking through. In some cases, you may need to make local adjustments in problematic areas, and that's what this brush option is for here. It's going to pull along the normals with this default option. That means your inner baking cage, the normals are going to be pointing inward. That's the direction it's going to pull. The outer baking cage, the normals are going to be pointing outward. So it's naturally going to pull your mesh out and away from the voxel object. You can check this if you want the reverse action. You can also use this option here for smoothing or relaxing, or you can use this for flattening. You have a number of different options here as well as far as saving and loading all your settings. And you can reset to the default. You can adjust the brush strength as well. I can see a bit of self-intersection. That means it's extruded too far in this confined space, so I need to go in the reverse direction with my brush. I'm going to hold down the Control key to invert the action, which is the same as clicking this. So that's going to push it back inside, or at least it should. If I need to adjust my brush, I can right-click and drag to the left, and it will decrease it. Right-click and drag to the right, and it will increase it. Hold down the Control key again. I think that will suffice for now. We may have some issues, and I would normally spend a little bit more time trying to clean that up on a regular project, but for now, for demonstration purposes, I think this will be fine. All right, okay. Then we'll get another dialog box that will allow us to choose some other options, such as our UV map size here. I can choose maybe a 4K map for each. I can choose the normal map preset for Blender. Unreal is a good option. Initial subdivision, that would come into play if we wanted to do a little bit more sculpting work in the tweak room where we would need a little bit more resolution, but under most circumstances, you could just leave that with no subdivision. Now, this is the important part here I was talking about, the UV map typing. If we wanted to do this all in one step, we would use this option here, auto-mapping. But since we've already done that, we don't need to go through that step. We can just use keep UV. All right, and we'll hit OK. 3D Coat's going to go through, as I mentioned, and bake these one at a time, but it should be relatively quick considering that we have all these different objects to bake. While it calculates, this would be a good time to stop the video, and we will pick up in the next one where we will see the result in the Paint workspace. So stay tuned, and thank you for watching.